Silent Hill was the thinking man's survival horror. While Resident Evil focused on the tangible threat of walking death, Hill built existential dread via sound design, disturbing details, and the rapid corruption of environments. Just when you thought you had an area figured out, it shifted into what Hillary Clinton sees every time she closes her eyes mode. Gameplay suffers little from age. Not only can Harry strafe and shoot while moving, he can also quick turn and adaptively track the nearest enemy. Guns scale appropriately in proportion to the amount of ammunition available, and melee weapons range from being good for a hit, stun, and run to spreading asses open like Bill Cosby at nap time. Combat, however, is not the focus of Silent Hill. Most of the fun comes from contemplating the disturbing imagery and open-ended lore. For example, why does Lisa bleed out of her head? Was she a parasite nurse all along, or is she simply a dyslexic that thinks with her twat in periods from her brain? Why did Alessa split herself into multiple little girls, yet fail to utilize this ability to lure John Podesta to Silent Hill? And perhaps most importantly, why was this corpse strung up in the bathroom with a shotgun at its feet? Was the gun offered up as part of some bizarre ritual, or did he react poorly to splashing poop water on his balls? I don't get what the big deal is, whether I'm sitting down to shit or standing in front of a urinal to shit. My balls dangle in the water either way. In terms of plot, Silent Hill's writing is excellent, but the dialogue is jilted. Dahlia Gillespie in particular sounds less like a voice actress impersonating a crazy gypsy woman than an actual insane gypsy who wandered into the recording booth to steal copper wire. The music and sound effects blend in a way that makes it harder to relax than James Sunderland watching a My Pillow infomercial. Level design seems straightforward at first, though you'll almost always have a destination circled on your map. Reaching the goal is rarely simple. Rooms are often locked by clever puzzles that require logic rather than fetching items, and the few fetch quests at the beginning of the game serve to teach the player how to use the map. The abandoned streets of Silent Hill are beautifully rendered, thanks in part to semi-transparent fog, which is fitting as I prefer to play Silent Hill while wearing my semi-transparent gown while squatting over a fully transparent coffee table. The nightmarish otherworld segments provide a subtle sense of foreboding, turning plain brick walls into rusted fences with who knows what watching from the other side. The functional layouts of buildings, which include fully furnished offices, filthy bathrooms, and classrooms, create a sense that Harry inhabits a real-world space that is filled with a real danger. Compared to later Silent Hill games, the enemies are less symbolic and include pterodactyls, progeria kids, Ninja Turtles, and Bill Clinton after 3 drinks. Overall, Silent Hill is damned good, and if you haven't played it, emulate it now since Konami is too busy making pachinko machines to port it. Silent Hill 2 came out in 2001, and the game's Azartman children have been cradling its balls and tongue polishing its pyramid head ever since. And I have to wonder, is it really as good as we all remember? Sure, Silent Hill 2 broke new grounds in terms of graphics, gameplay, and storytelling, but so did Resident Evil Code Veronica, which went full action game and also full retard. On the flip side, Silent Hill 2 actually stuck to its horror roots and was the rare breed of game where the dangers players faced went beyond an Ooga Booga man jumping out of a closet and slapping them in the mouth with his dick. Sure, physical danger was present, but the dread Silent Hill 2 invoked was less about the grotesque monsters and more about how things might turn out for James. Instead of anime cliches flinging viruses at each other, Silent Hill 2's supporting cast were regular people suffering the consequences of their regular problems. They felt like they existed before the beginning of the game, and as the protagonist came to terms with them, Silent Hill 2 became a game that was as entertaining as it was sad. Laura may have been a key-kicking cunt with a gigantic water-filled progeria head, but when you find out why she's so mean to James, you'll kind of agree with her. Eddie may have been a typical fat fuck with a persecution complex, but it wasn't his fault. Sure, you can judge him for killing the people that laughed at him, but how sane would you be after being force-fed an endless supply of Hampton pizza? Angela may seem more like a typical Aspergian mama's girl at first, but when you realize why she is that way, you'll almost regret wanting to play her buttock cheeks like bongos while she cries and calls you daddy. Almost. And perhaps most importantly, Maria proves Confucius correct when he stated, "It is good to meet girl in park, but better to park meet in girl." Luckily, Maria doesn't block your path often, and when she does, you can just shove her aside harder than if she burned the roast. She represents an interesting twist on the concept of a love interest. Rather than existing as someone for the player or protagonist to fall in love with, she exists as a reminder of the person James really loves, who is supposed to be rotting in the ground. And while Maria may be the #1 customer of the hot-to-trot thought removal service with the kind of inadequate 1980s titties that John Cusack should be sucking on after winning a boat race against the son of the wealthy businessman who was trying to convert the local youth center into a yacht club, James's departed wife Mary was a literal pillow biter. Luckily, the game does a good job of not completely spelling out Maria's purpose, save for in the optional Born from a Wish scenario. This last second addition to the Xbox port of Silent Hill 2 was the first of many terrible Western additions to Silent Hill. You can play it if you want, you can also suck an AIDS dick if you want. That doesn't mean you should do it, unless of course, the AIDS dick is mine. Then by all means proceed, and don't be afraid to work the yam bag. With his flaws, fears, and failures, the protagonist of Silent Hill 2 is especially relatable. James suffers not only from the horrors of the enemies around him, but from adult fears like rejection, dealing with the death of loved ones, and the results of forensic DNA tests. James reacts like a real person and is often just as confused as you are, although sometimes James does do the stupidest thing possible in a given scenario. Control-wise, James can do pretty much anything you'd expect a regular person to be able to do, save for not running like an idiot. Despite all the top-tier animations in this game, James still runs like every hack black comedian from the 90s doing an impression of a white man. Hey, did you ever notice that when a brother walks, he's like, "Oh yeah"? But when a cracker walks, he's all like, "Diddly-leet, diddly-loot, diddly-diddly-doodly-doot." Attentive players will note that James's head tracks objects of interest, which is especially helpful when running in the dark. After sprinting long distances, James runs out of breath, and if you run off of a ledge or into a wall, James stumbles like an idiot. Fortunately, James can move while shooting, strafe, quick turn, and track moving enemies with his attacks. The combat system is fairly simple, and thanks to the expert level demonstration of game mechanics, the player learns the mechanics without intrusive button prompts or tutorials. The first enemy appears directly after you pick up the first weapon, and the close quarters force the player to take it down. Enemies grunt like a retard taking an Indian food shit when you hit them, encouraging the player to avoid combat completely whenever possible. And the first enemy attracted to light appears in the same room you receive your light, and doesn't attack until your light shines upon it. The developers thought of nearly everything in terms of this light mechanic. James carries a map that he alters to reflect which routes he can and cannot take, but the map is not magic. He can't read it in the dark, no more than he can unlock a door in the dark, pick up items in the dark, or fluff a pillow without crying. The game forces you to choose when to go dark in order to avoid enemies' attention and when to shine a light, all without a single tutorial. It also helps that, in terms of design, polish, attention to detail, and evoking an emotional response, Silent Hill 2 blows everything else out of the water. To this day, games are still being released where mirrors are broken to avoid casting reflections, light sources fail to cast shadows in real time, and buildings lack basic necessities like kitchens and bathrooms. While the layout of areas can become absurd at times, that is done to play off the majority of areas which have logical layouts in realistic lived-in spaces. Cinematic camera angles frame spaces for the maximum amount of dread, while the manual override controls reveal lurking enemies and hidden oddities. Darkness, volumetric fog, and visual noise induce dread and makes the player question if they can trust their eyes. As a result, the player can never feel safe and is never truly comfortable. From Akira Yamaoka's impeccable soundtrack, endings based on how the player behaves rather than on binary choices, and the open-ended nature of the lore, Team Silent created a truly unique game that has yet to be topped near 20 years later. So overall, yes, Silent Hill 2 is just that good. If someone tells you otherwise, you need to cut them out of your life like that thing that keeps growing back on my inner thigh. Silent Hill 3 is the most unsettling game a teenage girl can play. Aside from that real-life version of Mystery Date I created for my closest gal pals, with a phone they could potentially utilize to call a strapping young lad at the police department is real, but they have to crawl through 4 miles of raw sewage and scattered human remains in order to reach it, only to find that the cell phone's battery, much like the dozens of other foolish girls whose attempts at escape had failed, has been dead for years, and also that there isn't enough room in the septic tank for her to turn back the way she came, especially after my bi-weekly taco-fueled Dumplestiltskin. From the veiny purple dick fetuses that slap the protagonist Heather harder in the womb than the tip of my penis once the nitrates kick in, to the cervix-faced Edward Dingus-hand monsters that attack with secret pricks obscured within their foreskin armored arms. And these complete jerk-offs who knock Heather on her back faster than if she thought they had a modicum of money in order to better sniff her queef and can only be distracted by the identical aroma emitted from expired packets of beef jerky. Silent Hill 3 is tailor-made to creep out girls. Heather Mason, aka Cheryl Mason, aka Aletha Gillespie, aka the female version of Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII, has eyes like twin piss holes in the snow, if that snow was composed entirely of grease, was bukkakied at birth by the freckle fairy, as my mother used to say, and dresses like the kind of man-hating lesbian that wouldn't think twice about crushing your nuts in a vice. I'm not saying this cutie pie with kidney failure is a full-blown junkie, but judging from her rat's nest hair that either needs more conditioner or less hobo cum infused into it, and her tendency to pass out face first in her fry basket at the food court, I think it's safe to assume she's been occasionally hitting the pipe. Silent Hill 3 begins where most nightmares for young women begin, with daddy issues. Being that Heather gave birth to herself after sacrificing herself in order to kill a demonic incarnation of herself, I think it's safe to assume she's a little too close to her adoptive father. I mean, just because they didn't share blood doesn't mean they never shared bodily fluids, because Heather is a good egg. From this gigantic uncircumcised purple penis pelvis beater boss that requires a 9mm bris to defeat, to the puzzles involving coat hangers, tongs, and a Plan B pill, Silent Hill 3's theme of pregnancy is palpable. Heather has repressed the memories of her horrific past and the atrocities she experienced in a hellish landscape, much like my own daughter, but as she creeps closer towards Silent Hill and its churches with more bodily fluid slathered on the walls than the interior of Zoe Quinn's Quim, the symbolism of puberty and pregnancy explodes. Between the bathtub fuller with blood than that time I mistook a discarded tampoon for a scabby loofah and felt so foolish that my face turned red. And this puzzle that requires you to drop Heather on a mattress like Bill Cosby after the sugar rush of the pudding wears off and the numb oblivion of the Zypiclone kicks in, you may begin to wonder what Heather's occasional stomach cramps are really all about. All I know is that it wasn't me. I don't care what that pregnancy test says, Heather. Just because you piss on something doesn't make it true. I'll piss myself all the time, and I'm the lyingest motherfucker on the oif. Opposing Heather on her quest to stab herself in the twat with a cork remover is Claudia Wolf, a barren bitch who should have taken her namesake advice and wolfed down some cum so that she wouldn't have become so lonely and desperate to have a baby that she ignores the 5-second rule and gobbles a fetus off the floor like an especially rabid George Soros after a 3-day blood of unbaptized children and powdered andochrome only fast. Aside from the fact that every time she does the splits, she fills the room with rancid egg salad sandwich vapors from her rotting ovaries, Claudia comes off as a tragic figure. Though she imagined herself to be close friends with Heather's past incarnation Aletha, girls never really like each other on a deeper level, since they are basically animals that are incapable of higher functions, and her friendship is ultimately rebuked. Her father Leonard, who crawls around in liquid shit juice as if he's trying to escape my alleged secret basement that the government doesn't have a single shred of evidence of following that mysterious fire, either suffers from end-stage syphilis or is just a Rothschild whose human disguise generator has malfunctioned. He apparently beat his daughter almost as much as she deserves for acting like a Jehovah's Witness, and after Vincent calls out her female god feminist utopian bullshit, she reacts like a typical feminist and stabs him in the back while he isn't looking. Gameplay-wise, Silent Hill 3 is just as competent as the games that preceded it, though Heather is equipped with the completely wrong type of mace to defend herself against the legions of not-wielding dogs wrapped in butcher's paper after escaping from the local Chinese buffet. Naked feminists infuriated by Hillary's latest tumble down some steps, annoyingly loud sword-headed bumblefuck bees that scared my dog out of the room every time they appeared, twitchy-ass nurses with amazing heaving breasts. I want a nurse from them. Well, let's not beat a dead horse with this joke. Despite the odds, with the help of Douglas and his private dick, Heather is able to make it through, and though she has to traverse this glorified 9-inch nails music video while stepping over the discarded corpses of degenerate furries, encounters so many rusted shut locks that the most powerful item in the game should be a can of WD-40, passing through the scariest subway that doesn't involve Jared Fogle and his special vintage sandwich that involves 30-year-old meat that comes between 16-year-old buns, and occasionally getting dragged away cunt first by Vatiel to the interracial breeding grounds. By the time she jumps down Brianna Wu's booty hole and slaps around a bony-ass god who needs to spend less time biting Heather's tits and more time biting some sandwiches, an amazing journey has taken place. Overall, though you don't reach Silent Hill until the final act of the game, which has happened more and more after the series has progressed beyond its natural shelf life, 3 tied up all the loose ends of the original game, and probably should have ended the franchise. The next Silent Hill would serve as the last to involve any developers from the original games other than the brilliant musician Akira Yamaoka, and after that, the returns diminished until none of that original magic remained. Silent Hill 4, The Room, is as far from the original Silent Hill formula as you can stray without completely missing the point and shitting the proverbial bed. Originally devised as a side game, The Room served as a final spurt of creative jizz instead. The series' original developers and hallmarks are present, but without the constraints of maintaining the established lore, or the boredom of exploring the same locations for a fourth goddamned time weighing it down. Instead, players explore a series of completely original, compartmentalized areas as Henry Townshend, a hopeless NEET who chains up his door like the first hipster gentrifying a black neighborhood and has absolutely zero connection or reaction to the events unfolding around him. In this, Silent Hill, and Frank Edition, you'll explore not only the existential dread of realizing you're just a bit player in someone else's nightmare, but also the tangible terror of being tracked by a troop of furious Tiger Wood clones and the unspeakable horror of Section 8 housing. For the first half of the game, returning to Henry's apartment allows the player to refill their health, check out some festive hand turkey art, and spy on the girl next door, Eileen, whose name is fitting, since I lean forward to obscure my pulsating pantaloon pike whenever I watch her surreptitiously. However, as the game progresses, you'll dread returning home more than a young Michael Jackson after missing a note during rehearsal, as the apartment is eventually invaded by more furious spooks than a South African farm. These otherworldly abominations include spectral Mexicans who have evolved to phase through walls rather than climbing over, tunneling under, or weed-whacking through them. A chair sat on by the ghost of Freddie Mercury after an especially moist shart, and some half-eaten Chinese takeout. The first area Henry explores after finding a hole in his bathroom wall that allows him to recreate the experience of a sperm flying through a piss tube towards an iPad is a grimy subway station inhabited by umbilical cord-tongued dogs, invincible ghosts that can flip their fists inside of you like an especially friendly drunkle, as well as a stunning recreation of my penis that is so accurate I immediately checked my bathroom and neighbor's azalea bushes for hidden cameras after seeing it. There, in the metaphorical dookie hole of a bustling city, Henry encounters Cynthia Velasquez, or as I prefer to call her, Jennifer Lower My Sperm Count Pez. This salacious swallower of seminal soup is so sensually seductive that I'd raw dog her anchor-dropping cooch on the northern Mexican border and utilize the projectile power of my pulsating penile pistole to propel her back to the godless country of refried beans and refried dreams, where she and the baby I will never acknowledge belong. To that end, Cynthia mistakes her descent into the other world for a wet dream after catching a hint of rotting fish in the air, and offers oral treats to Henry if he will be so kind as to escort her to the nearest shitter. Which is notable, as this is the first time, as far as I know, where a game's escort mission involves chaperoning an actual dick lick for a quick tip escort. Unfortunately, the destructive combination of eldritchian horror and a tum-tum filled with chipotle proved too much for Cynthia to contain, and she took a shit so massive that nothing of her remained, save for a hollowed-out husk with bloody hands. Before exiting the level, Henry encounters Cynthia one last time and finds her suffering the most ironic fate of all, a Mexican dying of knife wounds. Henry awakes in his room from what he believes at first to have been a nightmare, to find an ambulance wailing by the subway entrance beyond his window, and a radio host describing the details of Cynthia's demise. At this point, notes begin to appear beneath Henry's front door, indicating the involvement of Walter Sullivan, a long-dead ritualistic murderer who was so obsessed with Henry's apartment that he thought it was his mother and chipped his front teeth while trying to suckle from the front doorknob. Upon returning to his bathroom, he finds that the hole in the wall has dilated like a speedrunner between tapings at a Games Done Quick convention, and now leads to a poorly constructed forest level where pubic lice fly into his face as if he was eating pussy on a hot summer's day. Rectangular sections of a forest that are completely interchangeable, and eventually waste 20 minutes of his life completing an elaborate fetch quest that could have been completely avoided by pushing a wheelchair downhill with the tip of his penis, as we all do from time to time. There, in the shadows of a tremendous petrified cat turd, Henry encounters a stuttering moron whose head makes a hollow clinking sound when you whack it with a lead pipe, chugs chocolate milk as if it was a cure for Forrest Gump syndrome, and holds the key to a building called the Wish House, or, as the orphans who inhabited the place refer to it, the "I wish they would stop putting their fingers in my butthole every time I bend down to tie my shoes" house. Upon clearing this area, Henry finds that his new friend Jasper's excess chromosomes have accidentally rubbed together until igniting, and the level ends. At this point, other characters begin to take an interest in Henry's absence and the strange sounds coming from his room. However, they assume he's just beating off to anime too much, neglect to call the police, and the nightmare continues. Finding the hole in his wall even larger, Henry enters it to find himself in an impressive prison for children that frankly makes me rethink my own current layout and plans for expansion. There he encounters two-headed babies that require dual-wielded coat hangers to dispatch, and point at you like all those little tattletale liars that promise never to tell a soul what happened out of fear of you strangling their parents and cat, but suddenly got brave the moment a policeman with a hand puppet came near, as well as some overgrown sperms and more useless leeches than the German welfare system. Within the darkest recesses of this abominable dungeon, Henry encounters Andrew, an unlikable prick who gets off on torturing children and is missed by no one when he dies 10 minutes later. At this point in the game, another character comes into prominence, an adorable boy who seems at first ripe for a Hollywood producer of repressed childhood memories to prey upon. However, this younger version of the primary antagonist is about as on the nose as possible, and when he electrocutes, with an emphasis on the cute, Richard Braintree to death in the next area, no one will really be surprised. The only real standout moments for this underage Chris Chan cosplayer are when Henry gives up trying to save the boy from being carried off by his older self after taking about 3 half-hearted steps, and when the booger eater finally receives the late-term abortion that everyone else wanted for him from the start. In the next 2 areas, Henry explores a haunted version of the area directly outside of his own apartment complex, which is inhabited, for no particular reason, by monkeys, then a twisted version of the interior where the walls are constructed from raw ground beef. At this point, any normal person would be screaming, "You're tearing me apart, Lisa!" But Henry's Asperger's prevents him from displaying even a modicum of emotion, and he continues as usual. Upon returning to his apartment, 2 troubling events occur. First, the ceiling fan in his living room breaks, signaling the end of his free health refills and ability to cash in on his damage deposit, as well as the beginning of the half-assed haunting mechanic that can completely fuck you over if you return from a lengthy segment and fail to exercise a haunting because you placed your last holy candle 1 millimeter too far to the left or right. The next problem occurs next door. Apparently, while Henry was gone, the adult form of Walter broke into Eileen's room and caused the rest of her body to become almost as beat up as her pussy. On the bright side, if you think she's cute and want her number, you can just read it off of her back. At this point, things begin to fall apart. Having squeezed into it one too many times, the hole in Henry's bathroom has become so big and loose that he is forced to go around back and jam it in from behind. Upon exiting this new hole, Henry finds himself in a hospital populated by a deadly combination of leather-faced trannies with barely adequate buttock cheeks and invisible cribbles! After asking for a little head and finding out that Eileen is a contrarian bitch, Henry is joined by this delicious dollop of trollop on his never-ending quest to leave his room. Eileen's main additions to the game include her ability to decipher the arcane notes left behind by the antagonist, her tendency to run directly into enemies, permanently damaging herself and locking you out of a good ending, and gradually becoming possessed by her own ticking biological clock. After leaving the hospital, she and Henry spiral down a metaphysical staircase, one recycled area at a time, while a parallel universe version of Kurt Cobain, who finally learned how to turn the gun away from his face before shooting, chases them. Most players get a little pissy at this point, because as Henry and Eileen run through reused areas, they'll also have to outrun the ghosts of the people Henry failed to save. This hairy slut flops around on the floor like the fish her pussy smells of. This half-naked fatty rubs his big protruding nipples in your face before E-Honda flying headbutting you from off screen, but they all go down like a fat girl on prom night. After Henry equips his best anti-ghost Sonichu medallion, he can slap the ghosts around until they're just too tuckered out to stop him from penetrating them from behind. Also, for no immediately apparent reason, there's some dolls sticking out of wall-mounted buttholes for a boss. After clearing this victory lap of previously beaten areas, our heroes are confronted by an upside-down black man with some of the worst voice acting I've heard in years, who spells out parts of the plot that anybody with the mental faculties necessary to stop themselves from strangling their newborn, normal siblings should have already figured out hours ago. Eileen then decides her planet needs her and vanishes until the very last area of the game, where Henry confronts a metaphysical manifestation of Walter's desire to return to his mother's beat-up pussy that looks like it walked through a bunch of cobwebs. Having been completely possessed by Walter's rituals, goals, Eileen slowly walks towards her own demise and the destruction of the world as we know it, like some unintentional anthropomorphization of feminism. And if you don't act quickly to destroy the final boss with an umbilical cord and some club sandwich picks, a set of bad endings and a steaming hot sluice of screaming thought juice is your reward. Gameplay-wise, Silent Hill 4 is passable despite some odd choices. At times, you cannot proceed until you return to your apartment to inspect a drawer you have no reason to look at, or retrieve a bottle of chocolate milk from the fridge. And while these problems are easily overlooked, I wish new players the best of luck figuring out that there's one fridge in the entire apartment complex that they'll have to inspect 3 times in order to read a note that spawns the key under Henry's bed in the real world without looking it up online. In terms of combat, our Hikomori pal Henry can either smack enemies around with quick attacks or charge up his indifference for maximum damage. Weapons are literally everywhere, and often you'll pick up a weapon 5 rooms away from a clearly superior replacement. However, certain weapons break after a couple of swings and cannot be dropped from the limited inventory until you return to your apartment. As a result, Henry's collection of golf clubs quickly become useless scrap metal, his bottle of Chablis becomes a dapper African-American gentleman's knife, and he'll rarely have enough room for his Puerto Rican credit card plus ammo. In his room, Henry always has something new to observe outside of his windows, through his peepholes, or simply from inspecting his belongings. Overall, Silent Hill 4 is a flawed but genuinely great game that proves Silent Hill could change without losing its identity. Unfortunately, not everyone at Konami got the memo. Well, hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because the talentless diversity hires at YouTube have been far too busy marketing black dicks to children to finalize the deletion of my channel, we're going to discuss the worst thing to involve an unexpected truck stop since Reginald Denny decided not to turn on his CB radio during the LA riots. Silent Hill Origins. I would point out that this game is also known as Silent Hill Zero in certain territories, but that would imply that anyone other than myself actually knew that this pointless portable prequel to the previously primordial Silent Hill existed in the first place. Why do they call it Silent Hill Zero, you ask? Well, because that's about how many copies is sold if you try rounding up. More people have successfully sucked their own dicks while rolling downhill than have played this Silent Hill, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. In this Silent Hill Tracy Morgan Must Die edition, players experience the incredibly blurry hallucinations of a high school dropout who huffed the fumes of one too many of his own trucker bombs after a fateful rest stop at an all-night Chipotle and hummus buffet. Then jackknifes his rig to a screeching halt the moment he spots some unattended teenage tail on the turnpike, in hopes that, as a hitchhiker, she'll follow the golden rule of paying for her ride with ass, cash, or grass. Unfortunately for our friendly neighborhood little sister Fister with a blister on his jister, despite his best efforts to push past a younger incarnation of Dahlia Gillespie that is in the initial stages of transforming from an oddly modern single mother thought to the batshit crazy gypsy we all know and think about from time to time in the shower. On his warpath for that sweet passenger seat meat, he winds up running into a burning building and cornering Alessa after she's already been blacked, and no amount of passive-aggressive social pressure from her friends or the liberal media will ever trick a white man into touching her again. You hear that, Samantha? Take that fruit bat looking unwanted burden of yours and stop showing up at my parents' place at 3 in the morning, crying about how, if I was the real man, I'd stick with you no matter how many misbegotten mulatto mongoloids you've been hiding in the cupboard under the stairs every time I come over to blast a couple pints of my tantalizingly tepid testicular tapioca all over your Pravon for Trayvon tramp stamp and LeVar Burton bedsheets, and goddamn, that probably should have been a sign of things to come rather than just of things to come on, but I digress. Having overdosed on second-hand melanin harder than Nicole Simpson, our lascivious lover of little ladies and lot lizards alike loses consciousness, then awakes outside a hospital, like some of the fat women I kidnap. I mean, have a fateful encounter with in the alley behind the Fuddruckers, but realize all too late that they're just too abundant with a beautiful bounty of booty baggage to fit through the side door of my mama's Astrovan, and harvest their B-flips to tan and use as decorative belts instead. This dangerous proximity to socialized medical care corrupts our hero's mind, and as a result, he embarks on an epic 3-hour-long search for Alyssa instead of just leaving town and pumping off in the cab of his truck while driving past the playground like most big riggers do instead. Throughout this Odyssean ordeal, our tenacious trucker Travis Grady, whose name is fittingly enough an anagram for Travis Grady, utilizes his innate skills as white trash to steal household items like televisions, mayonnaise jars, and the basic components needed to make meth in his kid's bathtub, in order to better smash those items over the heads of his enemies. Though those breakable melee items help mix up the usual stale combat of the series, enemies will leg lock onto you faster than a bitch who found out you have money. The cooter stomps needed to finish them off often fails to trigger, and Travis lacks common sense quips like saying, "You're toast," when killing something with a toaster, or yelling, "Ooga booga, where the white women at?" while chucking the spear. As you bare-knuckle brawl AI-devoid enemies that walk directly into your fists faster than Anderson Cooper on date night, or blast them from across the map harder than a hooker who was hired for a cartographers and bukkake enthusiasts convention, you'll almost feel guilty. That is, until you realize that these low-poly poltergeists should have known better than to fuck with a man who regularly shits in a spackle bucket while driving 90 miles per hour through rush hour traffic. Within the walls of Alchemelia Hospital, well, within the 2 floors that the developers bothered to render, that is, Travis encounters a slightly younger Dr. Kaufman, whom is apparently performing back-alley gynecology exams on the side, much as I used to do before the police and my patients caught on, and Lisa the Plainful, who the developers seem to confuse with Maria from Silent Hill 2, since she now seems bent on tempting Travis to hate fuck her on the floor whenever they talk. These fan-fiction-level bastardizations appear sporadically throughout the game to provide the most basic breadcrumbs trail of a plot for Travis to follow, since he would have no idea where to go and no motivations to remain in town otherwise. These anthropomorphized plot points have no personal journey or connection to the game, save for the developers plainly pointing out the previously only hinted at aspect that they were fucking on the down low in exchange for drugs. As we all do from time to time, I'm not too proud to admit. It's the equivalent of making a prequel to Star Wars Episode 1 and having the protagonist accidentally stumble upon Senator Palpatine, Force lightning finger-banging Shmi Skywalker, then running off the moment she mentions feeling a tinge of miraculous Force-induced pregnancy coming on. But Disney wouldn't do something that stupid, right? Right? After fighting a lying figure recycled from Silent Hill 2, that's been propped up as a boss because the developers were too busy snorting their budget off of Maria Daikamura to design something new, Travis encounters yet another original character, Do Not Steal, in the form of not Pyramid Head, who splits bitches up the middle almost as hard as I do once the Jankum kicks in. Now, I know what many of you at home are thinking. Rosie O'Donnell is butch, but personally, I think this monster is a little butcher. A weak attempt at drawing parallels between Travis and the Butcher is made, and frankly, falls flatter than the quality of this game's textures. The writing is overall suspect. When Travis arrives at the nut hut where his mother tried to strangle him as a child, or the hotel where his father offed himself after offing his awful offal all over his hostile sofa, and is then forced to fight monstrous versions of them both, he doesn't even flinch. Alex Shepard from the much beleaguered Silent Hill Homecoming has a similar moment where he's forced to put his parents down quickly or let them suffer some horrific otherworldly punishment, and you can tell that it fucks with his head. In Origins, it's like Travis knows he's in a video game and just wants to get it over with as badly as the player. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad news. The meat and potatoes of the game are competent, and by the time you seal up the cultist degenerate fur fag god in a whack-ass crystal prison, you'll have barely felt like you've wasted your time. To that point, the puzzles of Silent Hill 0 take the form of convoluted fetch quests that probably should have incorporated visual themes relevant to Travis's personal traumas, like his psychotic mother's padded cell, his manic depressed father's suicide, or getting a blowjob through a hole in a cinder block wall behind a truck stop and noticing all too late the mustache hairs intertwining with his pubes, but involve collecting random items and come off as generic time fillers instead. Perhaps the greatest departure from the franchise's once renowned ability to tie everything together thematically are the magical mirrors that can transport Travis instantly to Silent Hill's oppressively oblique otherworld, and back whenever he wishes, but not allow him to see his own beehole, no matter how hard he tries. This takes the oh shit factor of stumbling into the otherworld out of the equation, and jumping back and forth just becomes a hassle. And I wouldn't mind so much if the payoff wasn't so underwhelming, having completed a convoluted laundry list of events that lead up to Silent Hill 1, much in the same way that a guy eating a meatball sub while shitting in the bushes on the side of Elm Street Daily Plaza in Dallas, Texas at 12:29 on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, technically led up to Lee Harvey Oswald's super sweet 360 no-scope, our video game equivalent of a mid-season anime filler ancillary protagonist suddenly realizes that he has no real reason to be in Silent Hill in the first place, and unceremoniously returns to his jury routine of transporting underage Mexican love slaves to the secret basement below CNN headquarters. He's never heard from again save for a brief cameo in Silent Hill Homecoming, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's played the game and felt anything for the guy. Harry, James, Heather, and even Henry went through ordeals and personal journeys that have stuck with fans to this day, and frankly, the mildly forgettable nature of Origins was an unheeded sign of worse things to come. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, you should probably share it with a friend while it's still available on YouTube. Then utilize the links provided in the description of this video to join my Discord so that you can receive alerts from when I livestream, since YouTube never does. Toss a buck at me on Patreon in exchange for a vote on which game or topic I'll make my next scripted video about. Check out one of my original ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks for a heart-healthy chuckle, or you can do your part to end the demonetization and demonization of conservative voices on YouTube by spreading rumors that BuzzFeed is hosting a Draw Muhammad contest, and wait for the problem to solve itself. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye! Well, hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because Konami does not know when to stop sharding down the throat of a once venerated franchise, we're going to discuss Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which is, in my opinion, the video game equivalent of your new step-pappy attempting to bond with you by picking up your dead father's football, signaling for you to go for a deep pass, then pegging you directly in the testicles. In this Silent Hill Invasion of the Short-Legged Midgets edition, players control a four-eyed, Markiplier-faced reimagining of Harry Mason from the original game, who is so off-model and off-character that he puts the turd in bastardization on his epic quest to find his daughter Cheryl so she can listen to him drunkenly having a three-way through the paper-thin walls of their double-wide trailer. Like all things repeatedly molested by their creators, this fat-tongued foray into fecalizing a once fascinating franchise requires a series of intense psychological exams to proceed, while the crux of Shattered Memories' marketing campaign was the game's ability to psychoanalyze the player and tweak the visuals to best spook their boots. In reality, the game merely checks to see if the player spends more time looking down the shirts of some frumpy floozies with beat-up pussies, or wistfully staring at the various bottles of Liquid Beat My Wife scattered throughout the game. Then, either sluts up the one type of enemy with disgusting meatball boobies that I would only titty fuck to show my dominance since sausage is clearly superior to meatballs, or makes them look like something a blue-haired postmodern art school dropout might puke up after affecting the performance art of eating a Pablo Picasso painting while reciting non-rhyming poetry about their queefs. While the triggers for the multiple endings of SHSM are interesting in theory, the gameplay just is not compelling enough to justify multiple slogs through. I have endured 2 trips through Shattered Memories for this review, and frankly, I would rather peel a pineapple by sitting on it than play through Schism again. As in the original Silent Hill, this Odyssean test of the endurance of man begins with Harry realizing that his station wagon is pussy repellent, then thinking back to his training at the James Dean School of Driving in order to cash in on that sweet personal injury money. However, instead of wandering a foggy town populated with Eldritchian horrors, mind-bending puzzles, and deeply personal visual metaphors while in search of his daughter Cheryl, this chromosomally enhanced, conceived by a rupture in the rectal wall during anal sex version of Harry wanders completely empty areas that lack even the most basic, spooky window dressings. It's like they started out by rendering and designing all the normal world versions of environments, then slapped blocks of ice on them, stolen from 1080 snowboarding from the Nintendo 64, at the last second in hopes that gamers would accept it as a hard-nippled version of the other world we've all come to know and love. Puzzles boil down to retrieving keys from key boxes directly next to the doors that they open, or shaking the only interactive item in an area until a key falls out from it. Which, by the way, I do not suggest trying in real life. I'm so sorry, Lamonte. I knew I said you could have those jingly-jangly keys, but I just couldn't resist the urge to jingle-jangle them myself. And I had no idea that shaken baby syndrome affected retarded children too. Only a single type of enemy appears in scripted events where the player will have to funnel their overwhelming urge to set down their controller and flee from this game into making Harry flee from the juiciest meat monsters since my dick. Instead, the basic routine for the 4 hours that Schism lasts begins with a quick multiple-choice exam intended to intuit the player's fears, Harry wandering a lifeless corner of the town for a completely inordinate amount of time, encountering an NPC whose behavior and appearance depends on the player's actions up to that point, then a complete clusterfuck of a chase back the way Harry came, but this time everything is frozen. None of the landmarks the player may have noticed the first time around are recognizable, and the mindless follow the blue ledges system is the result. The chases are not just the worst part of this game, but perhaps the worst part of my entire life. I may not know why the caged bird sings, but I'd like to think I finally understand why Bing Crosby used to beat his children with a pillowcase full of shoes. These crumb-snatching fart sniffers latch onto Harry's back like a fat nephew who wants a piggyback ride, and breaking free requires shaking the Wiimote harder than Michael J. Fox beating his meat during an earthquake, which completely fucks up the player's camera and movement every single time. Flares scare off the hordes of circus midgets for a whopping 10 seconds, and Harry's hereto untapped Parker skills never fail to come off as completely preposterous. I get that the devs intended for these chases to be a metaphor for the player running away from their problems, but that only really works if the player happens to run a burn victim ward for progeria kids. And to be perfectly honest, if I wanted to get smothered by naked manlets, I'd just cover my entire body with peanut M&Ms and let nature take its course. Shattered Memories, which is fittingly enough an anagram for the phrase "it's threesome dream," begins with a little girl proclaiming, "I love my daddy." But in reality, if Cheryl loved her father so, she would not have allowed him to partake in this unforgivable farce of a game. At the outset of this descent into the bunghole of madness, Harry explores a corner of Silent Hill which reveals such unnerving details as Silent Hill becoming enveloped by Clown World, that someone is stupid enough to ask if you've seen their cat when, of course you've seen it, it's right there on the fucking sign, and perhaps most diabolical of all, that the only black kid in town broke the fucking swings. Harry then meets this game's interpretation of Sybil Bennett, who has absolutely no reaction to Harry saying that his 7-year-old daughter, who may have been seriously injured in a car accident, is wandering around alone at night during a blizzard. However, being that this Sybil is more of a modern, empowered female cop than in the original game, Harry is just lucky she didn't shoot him when he pulled out his phone. Shit then freezes, and Harry gets a taste of what I go through every time one of my bastard offsprings gets old enough to personally chase me down for unpaid child support. Luckily, I've played some high school football, and all those little breast milk snatching ruiners of front butts get is a stiff arm to the face, much like their mothers did during conception. Back in the psychologist's office, the player is treated to a dumbed down version of the Draw a House Psych Test, which normally has the examiner interpret the size of the drawn house, the number of windows, or whether or not it has a front door to understand the subject's family life. But in this case, they just ask you to color a pre-drawn home, and the only effect is that I inadvertently cause Harry to inhabit a cabin more suitable for the artist formerly known as Prince. Unfortunately, Harry finds that his privilege has indeed been checked, and that Swedish immigrants have forced Harry out of his home after having been previously forced out of their own home to make room for Muslims themselves. Sybil then arrives to arrest Harry, but before he can resist, an emulation error forces him to swoosh right in, and Sybil makes Harry the latest man to stare at the back of her head for about 5 minutes. After confronting the horror of not being able to sniff Sybil's feet, another meandering trek through a large, empty maze, or, as my people call it, corn, ensues. Therein, players will stumble upon the aftermath of a man so literal that he followed through with his typoed text message to his wife about cracking open an ice-cold bear after work. Another chase challenges the player's capacity to hate until Harry eventually reaches the relative safety of Midwich High School, where the greatest threat of all comes from the silent menace of black mold. Remember, kids, though black mold comprises only 13% of the mold population, they account for 70% of all mold-related deaths. Beyond a couple of actually interesting puzzles, further into the school, Harry encounters a rogue chiclet saleswoman, Michelle Valdez, whom helps Harry break into the principal's office and hack his PC in search of that coveted secret stash of photographs of pregnant naked black women. They celebrate by going to the bar Michelle steals her toilet paper from, and Harry squirts a couple of drops on the ladies' room door just because he can. While Harry's upstairs stealing cookies, sniffing this Chiquita's banana, and trying on little Lupe's panties, Dahlia Gillespie intervenes, this time looking a lot less like a gypsy and more like Heather from Silent Hill 3 after some Source filmmaker perverts had their way with her textures. Depending on how you've played, Dahlia, whom is now apparently Harry's wife, suffers from a sliding scale of deliciousness to grandmother of 3 fatherless mulatto boysness, and escorts Harry to the edge of town. There, in the original game, Harry had to fight a gigantic moth to advance. Now he has to call a technician and flip 3 switches in sequence. Unfortunately, this bridge was designed by a diverse team of strong independent women, and our protagonist winds up almost as frigid as his wife. Though, on the bright side, this is probably the wettest Dahlia's been in years. Sybil then dredges Harry out of the lake and dresses him in route-appropriate clothing. On this particular playthrough, I roleplayed as a horn dog who sniffed every woman's room toilet seat and stared at every dirty picture I could find, which didn't distract me too much from getting back to and playing the game afterwards. So this Harry is dressed like that 40-year-old guy lurking in the back of the club, waiting for a fat girl to get drunk enough to want to see his classic Chevrolet, which she finds out all too late is actually a race car bed in my mama's basement. Perhaps the coolest twist of fate begins as the game teases the player with the possibility of the next chases involving Harry's wheelchair. However, that would have involved actual gameplay, so it could not be allowed to happen. The new hospital area teases the obvious revelations that there's more to Harry's car accident than meets the eye, but the only thing actually creepy about it is the looming threat of an Obamacare copay. After checking out, perhaps the biggest injustice of Schism unfurls. The once blonde, fat-assed, and delicious Lisa, whom I would have worn like a diving bell, is now an assless ginger abomination who has to bleed from her forehead since her cunt hasn't bled in years. Players with a taste for anthropomorphized broomsticks can watch her undress, utilize their vast knowledge of Pepe memes to give her the red pill, then encourage her to sleep after sustaining a major head wound. Sybil rightfully accuses Harry of murder, then takes her own command for Harry to freeze, literally, and oh do the levels begin to blend together at this point. Malls and apartments and the sole attempt of a nowhere segment, which is literally just a room with nothing in it, come and go without a single point of interest. Dahlia pops in and out of frame occasionally, sometimes tasty and delicious, others leaving the player relieved when she freezes up, though even in Uggo mode, I'd probably still piss on her mouth to defrost her lips, then slide my balls inside of her mouth, just because. After a quick man on Madame Ham slam aboard a catamaran, it is then revealed to maybe the one guy on the planet who didn't figure out on his own that Harry was dead all along and that the patient we've been playing as between levels was Cheryl. I'd almost feel bad about spoiling this surprise, but Konami will probably never port Shattered Memories to the PC, and most Silent Hill fans have no idea it even exists, which is probably to their benefit. While Shithem could technically have been considered a sequel to the bad ending of the original game, wherein Harry dies in a car accident, it really doesn't do enough to justify that sort of attachment to the original game. Depending on how you've played, a different ending cinematic will then play out, in a very clever attempt from the developers to distract the players from noticing their names in the credits. Overall, I have to wonder who this game was made for. While the original design documents planned by the developer showed a lot of promise and Akira Yamaoka's music is nice, the Shattered Memories we wound up with feels like a shitty cash-in game intended for the waggling grandma's market that the Wii enjoyed after Ellen DeGeneres shoved 4 Wiimotes up her daddy's finger and fat girl's tongue receptacle live on air. I was irked by Dr. Kaufman calling me a pervert for seeing sex in the inkblots when he was the one drawing all those dirty pictures, and the side areas and optional clues are about as compelling as the pleas I occasionally hear wafting up from my secret basement. Perhaps the most apt metaphor for this game are the collectible mementos scattered throughout, in that you spend the majority of the playthrough wondering what mysteries they hold, only to throw them away the moment it's all over. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, you can use the links provided in the description of this video to join my Discord, where a veritable cavalcade of autistic bed humpers await you. Vote for which game or subject I make my next video about via supporting my taco addiction on Patreon. Check out one of my original ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks on Amazon, iTunes, or Audible, so that you too can be a literary scholar, or you can do none of those things and create your own Western Silent Hill by eating a whole lot of roughage, then squatting over a DVD case instead. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye!